Hello BookTube, my name is Elizabeth. Welcome back to my channel, Bookas and Books, and welcome to the next phase in the renovations of my apartment. So the background behind me compared to the previous video is very different but very similar. The similarity is the furniture. It's the same. It's the same chaos. However, the chaos has moved room. So in the previous videos, I was in my little reading room and all the furniture was in this little room and also in my bedroom because the floors in this room were being made, and now the floors in this room have been made, and that meant it was time for the other two rooms, so all the furniture had to be moved here. And I'm using the passive voice, but I did that. I moved all the furniture on my own. I'm very proud of that, and that means I don't have to go to the gym. Anyway, I never go to the gym. I don't like it, and it's a waste of money, at least for me, because I don't go. Anyway, all of this to say that this is where we are now. Oh, I see ugly lighting, but it's not lighting. The light is turned off, but that's an ugly lighting fixture. It's going to be fixed in the next couple of days, yeah, well, in the week. Anyway, this is going to be changed, so it's part of the renovations in my apartment. I'm happy about that. But anyway, I still haven't been reading much. I read a bit more than I was in early January. In early January, I was so stressed. Now that the renovations have started, I don't know, things are going well. The workers show up, they're on time, they're nice. It's really, things are going really well. So, nevertheless, I'm not ready to talk about books that I have read, so I'm going to keep talking about books that I will read, or perhaps books that I have read in 2023. But this video is for books that I will read, because I'm starting a brand new reading challenge. It is inspired by other booktubers who have a similar reading challenge. Among other people, there's Roz at Scally Dandling about the books. She is doing a round the world in literature tour. So she's trying to read a book from every country in the world. So that means by an author born and raised in that country, in a language spoken in that country, and set in that country. I say that this triple requirement is not necessarily, I think Roz is trying to have to hit the 3 requirements as much as possible. And I know that some other booktubers or commentators, they have variations on these 3 requirements. But in my case, I want to do a round the world tour in nonfiction. And that means that the most important part for me is the 3rd requirement. It is the book set in that country. I want to learn something about that country. I don't care where the author is from. I don't care in what language the book was written. I want to learn something about that country. And that something can be anything. So for the book to qualify for my challenge, it can be any type of book. It can be a history. It can be a biography. It could be a travel book, somebody who went to the country and is telling us about all the wonderful things that they saw. It can be an art book about the paintings in that country, the architecture in that country. It could be a nature book. If it is country specific enough, I'm fine with that. So for example, a book about the platypus, that's a book about Australia. That's not a book about Canada. That's a book about Australia. However, a book about the beaver, it's not necessarily Canadian, because there are beavers pretty much everywhere in the north. So Canada, United States, Russia, Scandinavia, there are beavers everywhere. So unless it's about specific beavers in a specific place, then yes, it could count. But it has to be place specific, and I have to learn something about the country. Now, I know that reading one paltry little book about a country will not teach me that much about the country. I know that an entire country cannot be reduced to a single book, but it's better than nothing. I'm starting there because towards the end of the video, I'm going to show you a map of the countries that I consider already ticked, and I made that map from memory because my notebooks are in boxes and I couldn't really go systematically. Have I read a nonfiction from that country? I went by memory. Have I read a nonfiction about that country? Okay, yes. That number is so low. It is a paltry 22 countries out of more than 200 countries in the world. But that brings me to a second issue. I'm going to finish the what counts first. So what counts is a book, any genre that is about the country. Also, I have to be I don't know. There is a very subjective component to that. I have to be satisfied that I learned something about the country. Because some books are set in a particular country, but somehow I end up thinking that I haven't learned about the country. The book is more about the person who wrote the book and not enough about the country that they visited. I'm going to give you an example of that. There's the book, I never know the title in English. Journey Without Return, Journey with No Return by Raymond Maufrais. It's a diary. So this young man in the 1950s, he was bored. He had fought during World War II. And he was bored and he decided to become the first man to walk on foot from the coast of the Caribbean Sea to the coast of the Atlantic in Brazil. So starting in Guyana, so the coast in Guyana, and going all the way to Brazil. And anyway, that's his diary. He did not succeed. I'm just going to say that. But that diary is not about Guyana. It's about him. So in my opinion, I haven't read a book about Guyana because that book is about him. Same thing, though a bit different. Couple of years ago, I read a book about the Emperor of Mexico, Maximilian. It was in the 1860s or 1870s, a very, very brief period. Mexico was an empire and the emperor was the brother of the Emperor of Austria. And I read a book about that particular period. And then again, it is about Mexico in a way, but in the same way, it's not at all about Mexico. It is about Maximilian. It's about Europeans in Mexico in this weird period of the history. So I don't feel satisfied that I have read a book about Mexico. So I didn't count it. Even though it is set in Mexico, it is not satisfyingly set in Mexico. So I don't count it. Other things that don't count are books about multiple countries, which is a bit of a shame, which is a bit of a reason why I have read so few books, why I can tick so few countries, because there's quite a few books that I've read that are about multiple countries. An example that I can give, a few years ago, I read Sovietistan by Erika Fatland. She visited the 5 former Soviet republics of Central Asia. So Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, and which one did I forget? Turkmenistan. So it's one book about the 5 countries, and I learned a lot because this is a region of the world that I really did not know anything about. But for the purposes of my challenge, it doesn't count because it's not a one book per country. So I have to be satisfied that I've read an entire book about a country that teaches me a little something about that country. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that I keep saying country, but I don't want country to be my actual unit of counting for around the world. Because for 2 reasons. The first reason is that because my requirement, it does not include that the author must be born there, that means that I can read about parts of the world where nobody lives. I can read about Antarctica. I can read about the oceans. I can read about desert islands like the Galapagos. So that means that there are more possibilities because I don't have the author requirement in my challenge. Also, I mentioned the Galapagos. They actually belong to a country. But what is a country? Why should country be the unit determining how interesting a place is? I'm going to leave a link in the description box about to a video that has nothing to do with books and booktube. It's the Map Men. I don't know if you know them. They are hilarious. If you like maps, and even if you don't like them that much, just click on the video. It's very, very funny. They are talking about how does a new country get recognized, and it turns out that it's very, very arbitrary. And also, for me, the fact that a particular territory is recognized as a country does not necessarily make it super interesting as opposed to another bit of territory that is not recognized as a country. So for example, there's Andorra, a teeny tiny bit of territory between France and Spain. How interesting is that place? I don't know. I think it is not very interesting. However, a place that, in my opinion, is interesting but does not have the status of country is Puerto Rico. It's not part of the United States, but it's not independent either. It has this sort of limbo status. And why wouldn't I read a book about Puerto Rico? Because it's not a country. That's not fair. And then there's also the parts of the world that are part of a country, but culturally they are very distinct from the capital. So I talked about the Galapagos Islands. They have nothing to do with Quito and Ecuador. So they are, in a way, a different place. Same thing for the Easter Island and Rapa Nui, it's called in the native language. It belongs to Chile, but culturally it has nothing to do with Chile. Culturally, it belongs to the Polynesian Islands. Or think about China. China is one country, but within China there are regions that are very different. Tibet, Hong Kong. So I don't want to restrict myself to country only. It's going to be the basic unit of my challenge, but I don't want to restrict myself just to that. So it's going to be places more than country. So I'm going to try to color the map, but at the same time, I'm going to keep in mind that country is not necessarily the unit of my challenge. So, okay, what else did I want to say? I wanted to say a couple of more things. Yeah, okay, so my personal goal will not necessarily be to color the entire map. It's okay if I do just 75% or even 60%, because I'm starting with such a small, low number, and I don't want to set myself an unrealistic goal per year. I'm going to set the goal very, very low at trying to visit 5 new places per year. So at that rhythm, it's going to take me about, did I count? I did not count. So there are 200 and something countries. I've read from 20 something countries, so that leaves about 20 to 200 countries. At 5 per year, that's going to take me 40 years. Did I count correctly? 200, yep, 40 years. Okay, anyway, so yeah, I'm not going to do that. It's not going to happen. But nevertheless, I'm setting the bar very, very low at 5 countries. The reason is, if I read, let's say, 50 nonfiction books per year, chances are there will be about 20 of them that will be for the BookTube prize. So I have no control on what I read whatsoever. And then, so that leaves 30 books. I want to read Canadian nonfiction. Last year, I made a video of shame where I mentioned how little Canadian nonfiction I had read, and I want to make a conscious effort to read more nonfiction, Canadian nonfiction. So let's say I put the objective at 10 per year. That leaves 20 books. And then of the 20 nonfiction that I read, there will probably be a bunch of them that will not fit my criterias. So if I want to read a book about science, a book about languages, a book about something that is not country specific, then that's going to be at least 5 books, perhaps 10 books, I don't know. And also, I will want to keep reading books about the places that I know and places that I love. So I don't want to stop reading books about Italy or about France or Russia. I want to keep reading and learning more about these countries, because that's the thing. Once you read a little something about a country, suddenly it becomes interesting and it's fun to build knowledge around it. So that's the reason why I'm setting the bar very, very low at 5 new places a year. Now, what is my starting point? That I need to know that if I want to say 5 new places. So I did that. I went on a website where that you have a map that you can just click to get to color the countries. And I did that just with my memory, because I don't have access to my notebooks, my reading notebooks. They are in a box somewhere behind me. So I just went from memory, looking at every country on the map. Have I read a nonfiction about that country? And the map, the result is thus. So the countries that are colored in solid colors, that means that I have read more than 1 book about these countries. And the ones that are stripes are the ones that I've read just 1 book about that country. 1 nonfiction, of course. I keep saying book, but I mean nonfiction. You figured that out. I'm going to go through the list of the countries in case you're interested, and perhaps mention a couple of books that I have read, or perhaps more, sometimes not specific books, but the topics that I have read about relating to that country. Well, the first country, perhaps on the left top, it's Canada. Obviously, I've read tons of Canadian nonfiction and about Canada, so I don't have any I don't have any specific book to mention for that, but I have read quite a few. Same thing for the US. I've read quite a few, including because of the BookTube Prize. There's many books in the BookTube Prize that are US specific. So I've probably read more US nonfiction than I would have had I not been a judge for the BookTube Prize. And then if we keep going south, there's Cuba. I've read recently that I can think of from memory 2 books about Cuba. So one was Havana by Mark Kurlansky. I made a video about it last year. And another one was Orwell in Cuba by a Canadian journalist, Frédérick Lavoie, which was about the book 1984 being translated and published in Cuba for the first time in I don't know how many years. And then the middle of Central America is rather empty. The only other country in the Americas that I have read more than one book about is Peru, because I was very much interested by the Incas. I still am, but I've read quite a few books about the Incas and Machu Picchu, so that's covered there. And then we cross the ocean and we go to Europe. UK, I've read a few nonfiction about the UK, so biographies of royalty, whether it's the Tudors or modern royal gossip. I've read quite a bit of that. I've also read travel books like Notes from a Small Island by Bill Bryson, and books about World War II and the battle, not the Battle of the Atlantic, but the Battle for London, or anyway, I've read quite a few books, so the UK is covered. Ireland is covered. Among other things, I've read We Don't Know Ourselves by Fintan O'Toole, a personal history of Ireland. I really love that book, so there's that one. France, no surprise there. I've read tons of books of nonfiction about France, about various kings, about the French Revolution, about Napoleon, about the Cathars in the Middle Ages. One of the few topics in the Middle Ages that I think is quite, well, not that I think is interesting, but that I spontaneously am attracted to. I think the Cathars it's interesting. Anyway, moving on. Germany, mainly because of World War II, but also I had a fascination for Ludwig II and his castles. So I read a couple of biographies of Ludwig II of Bavaria. Austria, I had a fascination again for the Habsburgs in the 19th century. So about Francis Joseph, his wife Empress Elizabeth, their son Rudolf, who committed suicide and after having killed his very young mistress in a country house. It's a fascinating story. I've also read a couple of biographies of Mozart and Beethoven, so these are mainly set in Vienna. So that is, to me, books about Austria. So that's Austria. And then Italy, I've read quite a bit about the Renaissance, so the Medicis, the Sforzas, book about Venice, some books about ancient Rome like Mary Beard, SPQR. So I've read quite a bit about Italy. Ukraine, a couple of books. I read one last year, I forgot the title, but it was about Zelensky and Putin. And also I read For Want of a Fir Tree, again by the journalist Frédérick Lavoie. And that one was about the war in 2014 when Russia invaded Ukraine. And even though it's about 2014, it explains so much of what happened in 2021, of the 2022, of the invasion in 2022. It explains so much. And then Russia. I've also read quite a few books about Russia, mainly the Romanovs and the Russian Revolution. And also, I've also read a book in French about the 1990s, how chaotic it was and how it paved the way for Vladimir Putin. That was a very good book too. So I've read a bit about Russia. And then if we leave Russia and we go, we leave Europe and we go to Asia. China, I've read a couple of books about China. So one of them is Eat the Buddha by Barbara Demick. That was about Tibet. And recently I also read Red Memory by Tania Branigan, which is about how people remember the Cultural Revolution. So that's 2 books, nonfiction books about China. Japan, I've read Memoirs of People Who Survived the Atomic Bomb. I also read some books about tea and the tea ceremony and the importance of tea in Japan. So that's covered. And then the surprise in my list of books, of countries that I've read at least 2 books by, Burma. And these 2 books I read in the fall of last year. So one of them is The Trouser People that I talked about in my best nonfictions of 2023. And the other one is a book that is referenced in the Trouser People, and that is Impressions of a Young Girl. I did not write the complete title. Impressions of a Young Girl in Burma, something like that. So it's a diary, I guess, not so much a diary, but it's really a travel book, travel memoir of a girl who was in her 20s, and she went to visit her sister who was married to a colonial official in Burma. And she talks about her impressions of Burma. So that's another country that I read 2 books, about which I've read 2 books. And now the countries that I read 1 book. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 more countries. So in America, there's Colombia. I read what I thought was a very interesting book. It was Every Day the River Changes by Jordan Salama. So it's about the Magdalena River. So in a way it's a travel book, but there's a bit of history in there. He travels down the Magdalena River, which basically crosses the entire country of Colombia. And it's a very good travel book. In Africa, finally, a few countries in Africa are concerned. So South Africa, the only book that I counted there was Born a Crime by Trevor Noah, because it's the only one that I've read about South Africa. In Cameroon, Nigel Barley, I forgot the title of the book in English because I read it in French. Nigel Barley is an anthropologist, and he went to study a tribe in northern Cameroon. So it's about his experience, but it's also mainly about this particular people in the north of Cameroon. And then in Egypt, I read 1 book for Egypt, and that is a biography of Cleopatra by Stacey Schiff. And the thing is, I know things about ancient Egypt. I remember stuff. I've learned stuff about the pyramids and about the pharaohs, but I cannot associate that with a book. I don't remember where I got that knowledge. Did I get that from magazines? Did I get that from documentaries that I have seen on TV? I cannot think of a book that I can say, I've read that, and this is what I learned about the pyramids and the hieroglyphs and all of that. So I don't have any other book to mention, just Cleopatra. And then again, how satisfied am I that this is really about Egypt? Because Cleopatra, culturally, she was Greek. And in her lifetime, she spent a lot of time in Rome. So how Egyptian is she really? But I decided that it counts because Cleopatra, we associate her with Egypt. So I decided that it counts. And then moving on to Europe, there's Poland. And the only book that I read about Poland is, or specifically about Poland, is At My Father's Tribunal by Isaac Bashevis Singer. And he wrote in Yiddish. And I've read a bunch of memoirs of people who survived Auschwitz. Auschwitz is set in Poland. But I decided that for the subjective criteria of a book being that I'm satisfied that it's about a particular country, I decided that Auschwitz is not Poland, even though it was within the borders of what was then Poland and what is now Poland. Well, it was, I don't know if it was Poland. Yeah, it was Poland, I guess. I don't know how the Nazis saw that. But anyway, I decided that it doesn't count. So that leaves me with just 1 book that I have read about Poland. And then in Asia, there's North Korea, surprisingly. Again, it's another book by Barbara Demick. I've read Ordinary Lives, in which she interviews people who have left North Korea and tries to learn about what was life in North Korea, because it's basically the only way we can learn anything about North Korea is by interviewing people who have left the country, because that's how close the country is. And finally, the last country that I ticked is Papua New Guinea. Again, it's a memoir by an anthropologist who went there. I forgot the name of the author, but the author went to Papua New Guinea to record a language. And he stayed in a village in the middle of the jungle, 3 days walk from anywhere. And we learned a lot about the country, about Papua New Guinea. So that's the reason why I decided that it counts. And that's it. That's my map. That is where I'm starting from. So new places, again, 5 new places. I hope some of them will be countries that I can have something to tick, because I don't think on that particular map that I can tick an ocean, or that I can tick Antarctica or something like that. So, yeah. So I want to read about new places. So that's my starting point. It's 22 countries that I consider that I have read at least 1 nonfiction about. Is that a sentence? So it's my starting point. And by the end of 2024, I hope that I will be able to add 5 more books. 5 more books. Yeah, 5 more books or 5 more countries, that I will be able to tick 5 more countries. I'll try to keep this particular map in, that I won't delete it from my computer, and that I will think of adding the new countries in new colors. And yeah, so again, in my defense, that I haven't read anything, that I've read just 22 countries, it's the criteria that I set for myself. I have read several books that are about several countries at the same time. So in a way, I have read about way more countries than 22. An example, I've read Sea People by Christina Thompson, and I have also read Voyagers by Nicholas Thomas, I think. And both of these books are about how the islands of the Pacific were populated. So how they start from different points, and they have different way of telling the story. But it's basically how people left from the eastern part of Asia, or the western part of the Pacific, depending on how you want to see it, and gradually populated the islands of the Pacific. So gradually went from I don't know, where did it start? Tonga. I think it started in Tonga. And then they moved towards, I don't know, the Samoas, and then farther and farther to all the way to Hawaii to the north, the Marquesas in the east, and Rapa Nui in the southeast. So it's 2 books about all of these islands, but I haven't read a book specifically about, I don't know, the Tonga. Or Vanuatu. I haven't read a book specifically about Fiji, so it doesn't count. Same thing about the Middle East. There's not a lot ticked in the Middle East, but I have read books about the Middle East. One that I can think of is Black Wave, which is about how the rivalry between Saudi Arabia and Iran in the past 50 years or so has shaped Middle East, and not just Middle East, but the entire all the Muslim countries from Morocco to Pakistan, basically. So it covers a lot of ground, but it's not 1 book per country, so I don't count it. So that's my little defense of why this map is so blank. I have read about more than these few countries, but for the purposes of my challenge, it doesn't count. So in a way, I'm making this easy on me to read about 5 new places. I can read about places that I already know a little bit, but I just need to find a book that is entirely within the borders of a country, or within the borders of a region within a country that I want to discover. For example, well, I'm not going to give, I could give endless examples, but I've already mentioned, well, I haven't really mentioned it, but I don't know, for the UK, perhaps I should split it between Scotland and Northern Ireland and Wales and England. And if I did that, I think I've read books about England and Scotland. I haven't read anything about Wales and Northern Ireland. So for my challenge of 5 new places, I suppose if I read a book about Wales, it could count. But anyway, I'm going to try to go to countries that I haven't visited, because at the moment it's quite easy to do. And it's going to take me several years. And my objective is not necessarily to cover every country on the map. My objective is really to learn more about the world, to broaden my horizons in books, through books, and learn more about the world, present or past, in any type of nonfiction, from biography or art or true crime or nature or history, whatever. I just want to learn about the world. So that is it for me. Let me know in the comments if you're doing something similar, if you would be willing, or if you think it could be something interesting for you to do that in nonfiction rather than in fiction, or if you've done it in fiction, how hard was it? Because I think in nonfiction it's going to be a tad bit easier, because I don't have the requirement of having the book written by someone from the country in the language of that country. So that, because nonfiction in translation is very hard to find. So I would probably be limited to memoirs for many countries. And if you're a regular watcher of my channel, you know that memoirs are not necessarily what I gravitate towards. They're not necessarily my favorite type of nonfiction. So that's one of the that's one of the reasons why I decided that just a book about the country is going to be enough for the purposes of this challenge. So anyway, let me know what you think in the comments, and I will see you in the next video. À la prochaine!